Good morning, everyone. A responsive crowd. It's early for your kids, but it's not early for you, probably. I'm Mariko, for those of you I have not met. I'm very happy to be the president here at Bennington. Some of you very familiar faces, and some of you brand new to me, and some of you I saw just 3 weeks ago when you dropped off your kids. Feels like both yesterday and ages ago, as I imagine it does to you too. So before I get started, I wanted to introduce a couple of people, and then I'll talk for a little bit. And really what I would love to do is, rather than lecture at you, which we don't do a whole lot of here at Bennington, I would rather have a conversation. And I know your kids are up to that, so I assume you guys will be up to that too. And we can have a conversation here, some of your questions, interests, so on and so forth, reflections, and see where we go from there. But first, I would love to introduce, make sure they're all here before I call their names. Yes, Isabel Roche, who is the provost and dean of the college, back there leaning against the pool table. Zania Markowit, dean of students, back with the scarf. Lori Kobick, associate dean of academic services. Kate Child, director of first year experience and international student services. Here, they're all in the back there. Holly McCormick, dean of the fieldwork term. I know that some of you, and certainly your children, have engaged very heavily with a lot of those folks, and you may have heard their names here and there, or the names of people who work in their offices, and I wanted to make sure that you set eyes on them, and they will be, for those of you who are first-year parents, helpful to you over the course of time, and those of you who have students who have been here for a little while, you know a little bit more about what they do. So, as I said, not even quite a month ago, about a month ago, I spoke to many first-year parents in this room, tears and no tears, first-year parents in this room. As you prepare to drive off of campus, we're happy to welcome you back up the long drive for this visit today. And as I said, I suspect for you and for them, in some ways it seems much longer than that. I met with some parents yesterday, and I was very happy to hear their daughter say she felt like she'd been here forever in a good way, right? That this is home in so many ways. And that is what we hope for all students. And but acknowledge too that particularly for you parents of first years, that the first 3 weeks can also be a bit of a roller coaster. When you dropped your kids off, we talked about that roller coaster. And I talked with some parents this morning about, if the students in the room will forgive me, some of the goings on in the 17 to 25-year-old brain, what we know from neuroscience that you're just starting to learn, about the ways in which that age range, you are both an adult and not. You are both, as somebody said to me the other day, I feel like one day my son is an adult and can carry on this extraordinarily sophisticated conversation and talk to anybody and be in any kind of social environment, and the next day he's back in junior high and I don't know what happened. And that's just the way it is. It's not, you're not alone, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But for new students, you've settled into your houses and met new friends, and you'll continue to meet more new friends. I have a number of advisees, 4 of whom are first years, 3 of whom are second years, and 1 of whom is a third year. So like every other advisee, I get to see the trajectory. Obviously that's a small n, a small sample size, and yet it gives me a sense of the ways in which students ride the waves of being here and growing into themselves. Because that's really what we do here, is we work with students to grow into themselves. That's why we have a student-centered education. That's why we have the structure of the plan. That's why we have the layers of advising that we do. Because it's not just about us telling them what we think they ought to know, right? It's about helping them to grow into themselves. Now, most of that work, of course, they do. And we're here to help them and support them and guide them along the way. So your students are a month into their classes. They've certainly had their first assignments, maybe their first papers, maybe their first presentations, maybe their first performances. For those of you whose children are sophomores, they are drafting their plans, which is, as one of my advisees put it, a process of exploring nested anxieties. So I thought that was actually a very thoughtful way to put it, and trying to really unpack that, what do they call the Matryoshka doll, those Russian dolls that are nested in, unpack all those things so that they can grow into themselves and who they want to be, and get to that one in the middle, right? That final little doll that's solid all the way through, that stands on its own, right? And finding that and then growing that in whatever way they choose to. And the plan, the classes, the plan structure, the advising, these are the what's and the hows of education at Bennington. And I wanted to just take a little bit of time this morning to talk about the whys. On some level, you can say that the why is different for every individual student. But we want every student and every faculty member and every staff member and their deans and advisors and even their college president to always be asking, what is the purpose of a college education? And I said to the alums yesterday, some of you are here again in your other guise as parents or grandparents, but I said to the alums yesterday that one of the things that drew me to Bennington, and I think one of the things that drew a lot of you and a lot of your children to Bennington, is a very clear, though it may have started as a nebulous sense, but an increasingly clear sense that the world needs more Bennington. The world needs not just more Bennington alums, but more of what one parent of an alum calls the Bennington way. And when I think about that question, what does it mean for the world to have more Bennington? It brings me back to the purpose of higher education. And as some of you know, I was just in China for about a week with colleagues from Stanford and Johns Hopkins and Bard and Berkeley, talking with Chinese educators about just that question. And because like your students, and you heard me say this yesterday, but like your students, when I learn something new, I like to use it all the time. I'll say, 大学的目标是什么? What is the purpose of education? And in that case, what is the purpose of higher education? We spend a lot of time here thinking about that. All those colleagues I introduced in the back, the faculty whom you met yesterday, your children's advisors, and even the people you might not see or interact with. Because in fact, one of the things that really drew me to Bennington is knowing that we're all thinking about that all the way through, right? So the person who asked me the most incisive, insightful question in the big public venue when I came and interviewed here was someone on the groundskeeping staff. Because everybody is invested in what happens here. And I see it from multiple different angles. Some of your children know I am embarrassingly taking African dance, which is a wonderful experience. And my husband asked me, what do the students think? Are they nervous that you're in there? And I was like, oh, they do not care that I'm there. We're all sweaty. We're all working it out. And that's part of the spirit of Bennington, right? Is we're in it together. Some of us know more about some things than others, but we're in it together. And the reason why I take a class, last year I taught 2, the year before that I took 2, is because I want to understand Bennington in the round, right? And Bennington in each particular moment. And that's what we all do here. And I see your students, your children, my advisees, students in my classes, and also students in the classes that I'm taking, and just around and about when I talk to them in the dining hall or wherever else, that they are building confidence, they're finding maturity, some of them in a more wayward way than others, but finding maturity and acquiring vast amounts of knowledge and expertise. And importantly, they're building a crucial set of skills that will help them navigate their futures. Because to earn a degree at Bennington, as some of you well know, you have to learn a lot of things, right? And it's not just one damn thing after the other, right? You have to learn a lot of things about yourself and about how you want to be in the world. And you have to seize on a line of inquiry of your own devising. You have to do the research required to know what you don't yet know. You have to find the resources on and off campus to further your projects, your ideas, your interests, whether that's fieldwork term or anything else. You work with expert advisors and mentors, of course, to guide you, but you're the one who has to connect the ideas and the data and the approaches to thinking about the world in a way in which you haven't before. You have to be comfortable facing some uncertainty, and venturing into new territory, whether that's African dance or economics or anything else. And the thing that's most exciting about it is you have to do this in a place, in a way, where the answers aren't worked out in advance. And I always talk about Bennington alums and Bennington students as being people who don't necessarily want to follow in somebody else's footsteps, because what fun is that? They want to make their own path. And that's the only way, by the way, that you change the world. Right? So when I talk about the world needing more Bennington, that's what I mean. But in order to do that, you also have to allow a shift in your thinking when the evidence merits it, when the context merits it, when the experience merits it. And you have to embrace the learning opportunities that are offered both by success and by failure. And when you've done all that, or as you're doing all that, you have to learn how to communicate effectively and advocate for your work, your ideas, your vision, yourself. So when I think about the purpose of higher education, when I think about the purpose of a Bennington education, and when I think about what it is that we do here and why we do it, I think about all those things. And I think about, frankly, the world that I hope your students, your children will make. Not around particular policy prescriptions, though I may have my opinions about that, but about the way in which they will behave and work in the world, the way they will be, so that new ideas can come to the forefront for all of us. And it's in using those skills that I just enumerated that your children, your students, will build. And people often say find, but I would say build a life of purpose and meaning, and yes, success. But success always has to be tethered to that why. And I've arranged this beautiful weather for all of you. And no matter how utopian it feels here, we also know, and the students also know, that as the graduating speaker said 2 years ago at commencement, a Bennington education is an education in the real. And she said it far better than I, because she went to Bennington. But it is an education in the real life, real problems to solve, real goals to achieve, real purposes, real consequences. And that's a big part of what we mean when we talk about experiential learning, immersive learning. It's why we have the fieldwork term, but it's also why we teach the way we teach when your students are here on campus. So, as soon as you guys leave, you parents, guys, grandparents, leave, your students will buckle down and get back to work. They'll also start to talk about coming home for Thanksgiving. They do like to see you. And they'll talk too about that very Bennington conversation, which I hear about from alums as well, of the what do you major in, right? What did you major in? If you're an alum, what are you majoring in? If you're an undergraduate, and that's a particularly interesting, engaging, difficult conversation sometimes for Bennington students to answer, because there is no pat answer, because we don't have majors. And saying we don't have majors, depending on what Uncle Fred is like, may or may not be a conversation you want to have at Thanksgiving dinner. But for the students in the room, and also for you parents who are here to support your students here at Bennington, I would encourage you to make that a true conversation. A parent of a second year whom I ran into yesterday, and I said, how's your weekend going? And he said, it's great. I just had lunch with my daughter and her friends, and I had one of the most stimulating, conceptual, philosophical, interesting conversations that I've had in a long time. I don't get to have those conversations very much. It's an extraordinary experience. Even more extraordinary when it's your own child. My kids are toddlers, so I don't have that experience very often yet, but I'm waiting for it. It'll come. But you guys do. And I know some students talk to their parents more than others. Some students text their parents more than others. But know too how vital you are to their intellectual development, their social development, sometimes by being in it, sometimes by giving them space. But they want to share with you, I know, what they're doing. So I encourage you to give them real room to do so. So with that, I would love to talk about whatever you all want to talk about. And welcome or welcome back to Bennington. Yes?
So I'm buying into your utopia and here 100%. Thank you very much. Last week, The Economist published a very staggering, interesting statistics. They wrote that in 1990, the three largest car companies in the United States had a valuation of $36 billion.
Car companies, you said?
Yeah, car companies and 1.2 million workers. In 2014, the three largest internet companies in Silicon Valley had a valuation of $1 trillion and 176,000 employees only. This utopia does not work very well with the cruel work outside there and the changing economical realities that we're all facing. And we were trying to guide our children. What would be the next step in their life? And I was just wondering, how do you reconcile the utopian world here? And I had this conversation with my daughter and the kids in the dining room, and it's wonderful. I'm anxious, I guess.
So parents with anxiety, I've never heard of such a thing. So, say a couple of things, right? And we can have, obviously, a very long conversation about this and all of the things that feed into it, which are not linear, and they're not only, in this case, US-based, right? And there are questions of macroeconomic policy, labor policy, a range of other things, even healthcare policy, and a range of other things that are beyond the remit of a parent discussion, though I'm happy to talk about them. In terms of our students, right, on some fundamental and pragmatic level, right, this is why we have fieldwork term, right? And this is why we have 4 of them. Lots of schools have 1 internship experience that's required. But by having 4, and I say this also to allay parent anxiety, you have 4 chances to try 4 different kinds of things, or 4 of the same, right, should your student so choose. So you can experience different kinds of environments. Right? You can flex your brain in different ways, and for some students, their bodies, if they choose to do a dance or a theater fieldwork term, for example. Right? You can learn more about yourself as someone working in the world. And with a lot of students, too, I talk about fieldwork term as an opportunity to field test their ideas. Right? Here is this, though not perfect, in many ways utopian place. Here is this tight-knit community of trust in which students can take real risks with support. And then they can go and test those things out in the world. And they can take what they learn out in the world during fieldwork term and bring it back here and test it again. Right? At the very least 4 times, and if your students work over the summer in those kinds of environments, 7 or even 8. So that is the thinking behind the fieldwork term. That's why Holly and her team work so hard to make sure that students don't just have a job, but they really have thought about what it is that they want to do and what they want to get out of the fieldwork term, which doesn't mean, you can want to be a photographer and have 3 of your fieldwork terms have nothing to do with photography. Because the benefit is not just in the vocational aspect or conceptualization of having a job, it's also in the lived experience of what it's like to have a job with real stakes, right? Because these are not, for the most part, jobs in which students are, your students will be the only intern, right? And they'll be, in many cases, not treated like an intern, right? They'll be doing real work. So especially if they have a first fieldwork term where they feel like they're an intern, they will definitely look the next time for something where they feel they're doing real work. So on the very logistical, pragmatic level, though it has many more layers than that, fieldwork term is one, though it wasn't designed as a response to this particular moment. It's been part of the Bennington education for pretty much since the founding. So that's one piece of it, right? But it's evolved over time. The other is, and I don't want to be too long-winded here, but the other is what I was talking about in terms of the purpose of education, right? We don't know what the jobs of tomorrow are going to look like, right? So those are the stats for today. The stats 15, 20 years from now will be different. We don't know which direction they're going to go. We don't know, something about self-driving cars or something like that. I mean, we don't know what it's going to look like, right? And not just from a technological point of view, which is where it's easiest to gather the numbers and I think focus the collective attention, but also from a policy point of view, right? Both intended and unintended consequences. From everything from trade agreements to labor standards to environmental standards and on, right? We don't know what that's going to look like. So one of the answers to what is the purpose of higher education is to prepare students for the world that we cannot yet imagine. And I firmly believe, as do all the people who work here, who support your students, that the key to that is making sure that students understand how to craft their own way. And some of that is about the whole student, right? Understanding what it is to be resilient, and reading about it is one thing, but feeling it is another, right? And some of it is about the practicalities, and some of it is about studying broadly so that, frankly, there's not a whole lot that scares you then out in the world. And if I could quote you, and you can tell me if I misquote you, as I heard from an alum yesterday who shall be remain nameless, that Bennington taught her to not let her insecurities overcome her curiosities, but rather to let her curiosities overcome her insecurities. So, yeah.
So I would like to say, never underestimate the power of one person to change the world. And what that means is you're not going to get that one person in a university where it's all about competition, high achievement. Please forgive me. Where students are pitted against one another, and it's all about the survival of the fittest. This college is about cooperation and creativity, and there's more of a chance of a Bennington College alum changing the world than in other colleges, I think. So now I'm going to give a testimonial. That's what I do.
I'll drink my coffee. Go ahead.
My son is a senior, and I want to tell you I'll try to make it brief, what Bennington is. When we were coming here for the first time, he was having a nervous breakdown in the hotel because he didn't think he was ready for college. And this kid went to China, spoke fluent Mandarin. He missed his flight in Harbin because there was so much pollution on the airport. They weren't going to let the plane take off. And he had to have a connection he missed in Taipei. This kid spoke fluent Mandarin to get a free taxi, a free hotel, and then booked a flight for the next day. And that is what Bennington is. He has a Chinese teacher who is giving him private lessons because he has gotten better than the other students. And she's already booked. She has to work from 6:30 in the morning till 8:30 at night to accommodate her private students. And that is Bennington. He is taking advanced music classes. He's taking advanced Chinese classes and advanced sculpture classes. And that is Bennington. He is doing such amazing work. And on top of being a hard worker, and if you want to get into classes, you have to be a hard worker. He's taking he's just a good person.
I'm not sure we can take credit for that part. You can take some credit too.
And he thinks globally, and it's just been a pleasure having him here and seeing him develop and seeing, what Bennington can craft. And then I'm going to end with one story. So he was criticized in his junior review because he wasn't working in series. You know, he was just going all over the place with his art. And so he finally did 2 pieces in series. And then he told me, Mom, I'm writing an SEC grant to get a 400-pound pig. So his 2 other things were light sculptures. And I'm going to do something with that. And I said, Perry, I don't know if that's working in series. So I went to his sculpture professor and I said, I've got some concerns that he's going to buy this 400-pound pig and he's going to do something artistic with it. And then he's wanting to feed the campus with it, you know, afterwards. And his professor laughed so hard, he just had this belly laugh that I've never seen. And he said, I'll talk to him. And that is Bennington.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can you give a facilities update and the renovation of the dining hall is? We've heard a bit about that.
Yes, sure. And I don't know if Andy's here. Thank you. Hi. So Andy Schlatter, who is the AVP for Facilities and Planning. Is that your title? Yeah. Also will just help me in case But the plan is to break ground on the renovation in June. The plan is to re-outfit this space to accommodate dining, and we're in the process of figuring that out and designing it right now. So I don't have any plans to show you or anything like that, but we are working very closely with architects and also with the food service folks to make sure that we can accommodate everybody. And construction will take, I always hate to make promises about how long construction will take, but construction will take about 18 months. And so, and then when it's done, Commons will be much better outfitted to accommodate not just the flow of students and so on and so forth, but also the way that we eat today. If you were to, which I don't encourage you to do, if you were to go down in the basement of Commons, you would see a sort of perfectly preserved, 1930s style, food service back of house, right? And so we really need to upgrade that. We get food deliveries every day now. When that building was built, we would get food deliveries, I don't know, probably, once every couple of weeks, once a month, so with these giant freezers we don't need and so on and so forth. So in terms of what will happen, though, in the intervening time, it'll be a combination of approaches, but the principal one will be a re-outfitting of this space. Andy, anything you want to?
If you want more specificity, I could go into it. We held a session yesterday morning where we talked through the Architects for Commons were here and presented all the plans for that, as well as all our temporary sort of accommodations for the facilities that are going to be displaced from Commons during the time that building is under construction. So we could spend an hour talking about it, and maybe if you're interested, I could hold a little side session over here at the end of this, rather than take up too much bandwidth in the midst of this. So.
Yeah, back there, and then you had a question back there.
I don't really need a mic. When's it supposed to start?
Oh.
June. We're targeting June of this coming year.
Sure. Is there a question back there? No. Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Other than your toddlers, what keeps you up at night?
Yes, the 3-year-old was up at 5 a.m. If anybody has any tips about that, I'm open. Yes, I do teenagers very well, but everything that comes up before that. So what keeps me up at night? It depends on the time of year, right? I mean, on some level, what keeps me up at night is whatever is keeping your kids up at night, right? Because it was interesting yesterday, we had the Board of Trustees here, and they had lunch with a number of students and on Friday, and then they went to some of the sessions yesterday and talked to students along the way. And I hope they were very gratified to know, as the chair of the Board of Trustees said to me, that the things that they heard from students, the interests, the concerns, the questions, were all the things that are on our agenda, right, that are on the board's agenda. And I think that's really one of the benefits of not just me, but all of the staff you see in the back and the people you don't even see, really knowing and spending a lot of time with the students. So what keeps me up at night is generally whatever's keeping them up at night. So whether that's finding fieldwork terms, finding places to stay for fieldwork term, which, by the way, we're going to have a parent engagement session after this. And if you all have fieldwork term jobs, opportunities, connections, if you have particularly, but not only, if you live in New York City or other places where it's really hard to find housing, particularly free housing, that if you're willing to share a couch or have an extra room that you can provide for fieldwork term students, that's gold. That's terrific. And we've still got money to raise to renovate Commons. We have about $11 million of $18 million raised. So that keeps me up at night. But mostly on a day-to-day basis, what keeps me up at night is whatever's keeping your kids up at night.
What is on the board's agenda?
So there was a lot of talk with the students about exactly the question that was just asked about, what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen with Commons? See if I can remember all the things. They asked some questions about advising, and not so much concerns, but just really wanting to understand how much the board understood about advising. And we actually spent a lot of time with the board talking about curriculum and advising and so forth, so that they're really immersed in what we do here. They asked some questions about future renovations. They asked some questions about food service. They also asked questions about diversity and inclusion. They asked some questions about fieldwork term and support for fieldwork term as one of their big concerns is making sure that students that they talked about fieldwork term, frankly, as a time in which economic differences among the students really come to the fore, right? Because depending on where you live and how connected your parents are and this and that, you have a different range of opportunities, and whether there were ways to help even that playing field. And I will say very directly that you all are, you and the alums are the linchpin in that. You guys are critical in that, right? So to the extent that whether it's your networks or your own places of work, or it's the places you live, or somebody else who'd be willing to put up a student, those things are, as I said, they're like gold. They're incredibly important and valuable to students. And we have lots of students who figure it out on their own, but particularly first years, little help goes a long way. So, yeah.
The discussion yesterday after the STEM and STEAM talks necessarily went off in a different direction. I wonder if you could just hold forth a bit on what you're doing here in Bennington to keep in that integration and prepare future grads to facilitate that.
Yeah. So those of you who don't think in acronyms, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, math. Let's make sure I got them in the right order. Spelling bees were not my thing. But integrating the arts or engaging across the arts and sciences, and as somebody pointed out at the session yesterday, also social sciences and humanities. So a couple of quick things, and then I'm happy to talk about, more deeply any of them. One is that we have a lot of visitors who come here, maybe as parents, but also just coming to see what we do, who come from research universities, who come from big sprawling, whether they're state universities or more the kind of MITs and so forth. Just had a visitor here from Stanford, and one of the things that they often say is, God, we had to build a building to get the fill in the blank, right? The engineers and the painters to work together, or the computer scientists and the dancers. And when I worked at Arizona State, I can tell you we had to build a number of buildings to get people to work together on these issues. And most of the questions that frankly drive your students' education, because they're the big questions of the day, and sometimes the small but incredibly important questions of the day, things around climate change and environmental sustainability, they require multiple disciplines, all right, for you to really think fully about them. And they require multiple, as was talked about yesterday, languages. It doesn't have to be, languages in terms as Chinese and English, though that's one, but ways of thinking, right? Languages as ways of thinking and approaching a problem. That they really require that, and that other places have to build buildings to make that happen. And here it is what happens. Right? It is what happens because not just the students do it, but the faculty do it as well, and it's a way that education is designed. It's why we have the plan process and not majors. So it is very natural, or if you'll forgive the phrase, kind of organic here. At the same time, there is work done at the faculty and administrative level to make sure that we don't lose that we encourage it, that we amplify it and layer it in. So just to give one example, a couple of years ago, we got a grant from what the Sherman Fairchild Foundation. It's a foundation based out of DC, in part of their Arts and Technology Initiative. Right, that enabled us to buy a number of pieces of equipment. It also enabled us to hire a tech to support that equipment and do a range of trainings where we brought in people from the field to not just train people in how to physically use the equipment, but to really talk about what the possibilities of the equipment are and how the various things work together. Faculty and students together took those courses. And it resulted in a number of different projects, including one in which now students have worked with 2 faculty members to bring actually social science, science, history, literature, and 3D modeling, sculpture, painting, graphic arts together to design a piece of sculpture that was commissioned by the U.S. State Department and will sit at the forefront of the Norwegian U.S. Embassy in Oslo, the new U.S. Embassy in Oslo. Additionally, a project, I was just in Beijing, as I said, a collaboration with the Beijing Museum of Contemporary Art, which we had a design competition of Bennington students, faculty, and staff to design, in this case, salt and pepper shakers. Right? But there's going to be a show of these designs. I just saw the poster, and it was so great to see in Chinese and English all these Bennington names up on this poster for the show that will be mounted at the Beijing Museum of Contemporary Art, and really brought together both science, social science, right? How do people use objects, social science, and the arts. So it's really integrated across our curriculum. Yes, and then yes.
So maybe just a bit of a related question to this theme and the integration of science, technology, et cetera, with the arts. So of course you don't have distribution requirements here, which is probably a good thing, but I'm wondering what your philosophy is in terms of ensuring that students really take a balanced program and have a foundational kind of experience.
Yeah. So we talk about this a lot actually in faculty meetings because it's something that needs constant attention, not because it doesn't happen, but because we want to make sure that it's always happening. Right? We don't have distribution requirements, as you said. We don't have required courses either. But what we do have is the student-driven inquiry and the intensive advising. Right? So that all really comes out in the advising, and it comes out in the plan process. So I'm now shepherding some of my advisees through their writing their first plan. And one of the things we talk about a lot, so for example, one of my advisees, he's very focused in music, but we talk about what is he really interested in about music? Well, what he's really interested in about music is related to storytelling. Okay, so what classes is he going to take that are going to amplify that for him? And if he really wants to work in music, he also has to take computer science, right? And he also has to understand the history of the arts, right? So it is around the question and the interest of the student, and that's where the advising, when I was an undergraduate at another institution that shall not be named, your role of your advisor was to make sure that you ticked all the boxes, essentially. And if you happen to connect with your advisor, you might have a conversation about how to do some version of what they did, whatever that was, right? But it really wasn't about what interests you. It wasn't until I got to graduate school that anybody asked me what I actually cared about, right? Rather than what I wanted to do, which is different. And so that's really what the advising process is about, and as you know, it's multi-layered, right? It comes through the fieldwork term advising, it comes through the staff advising that we do around the first year experience and beyond, and it comes through the relationship with the faculty member. And one of the things that some of you, particularly first year parents, may have noted is that the advisor-student matching is not necessarily by discipline, right? So my advisee who's focused in music can tell you that I don't know a whole lot about music, but I know how to frame a question and I know how to help him to build an argument. Right? So advising really is about the student articulating and describing it at a much deeper level than just saying, I want to take this class, and this class, what it is that's driving them. It's back to the purpose. Right? What's the purpose? There was another, yes.
My son is fourth year and has just had a phenomenal experience here. Sorry. I'm saying my son's fourth year has had a phenomenal experience here and has grown in every way that, we're so thrilled with the place. I've always, though, been a little, I don't really get from him about the process of the fieldwork term, and I would say that has been kind of a vague 3 fieldwork terms that he has done. And I'm just out of curiosity, so if he has something that he would like to do in a fieldwork term that is more kind of kind of more specific, are there like listings of places? Are there, because I've always gotten the feeling that he's sort of invented something in his head and kind of done something that's a little, you know, or asked a professor, but I've never gotten the sense that, even though I know he goes to talk to the fieldwork term office, but I've never gotten the sense of what resources, I guess I'm trying to say, are available. He's got places to stay every state of the, but I don't know about like what are the resources for getting something.
So Holly, if you want to jump in here, at least just wave your arms around so people know who you are again. Holly McCormick is the Dean of the Fieldwork Term. So we have, I think, 1,300 jobs listed, something like that. We have a database of jobs. There are many students who go through that database. For some of them, it's the place to start, especially first years, to just get an idea of what kind of job. But then they may go off, you know, on their own or get linked up through a faculty member or through someone else they know with the actual job. But we have lots of students too who find a job on what we call WorkLink is the name of the database, who find a job on WorkLink, and that's the job they go after. And you can sort in a variety of ways by place, by industry sector, by type of job. So we do have that, and then we have, as you know, the fieldwork term counseling. You know, we don't force students to take any particular path through fieldwork term, other than that they have to discuss it with their advisor, they have to get it approved, and so it really is about that direct and personal relationship with the advisor and then with the fieldwork term office. And we do encourage students also to make their own way, because that's a lot of what we all do in the world. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Bill Neal. This is our family's 7th family weekend, 2 students. I've seen a lot of great changes to the physical plan steadily. I'm a plant manager, so I don't know if I need this, but and also, you know, strategic changes to work with prisoners and stuff like that. I wonder if you could talk about, are there some new, you know, strategic sort of program changes that are coming to Bennington over the next few years?
Yeah. So obviously we'll be renovating Commons. There's that. And just so for people who aren't as familiar, we have a set of programs working both on changes to incarceration policy, decarceration policy that's run out of CAPA that involves students, faculty, and lots of external organizations, and some partnership with John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And then we also have a program whereby Bennington faculty teach in Great Meadow Prison, which is just over the line in New York, which is a maximum security prison, teach courses for credit to people who are incarcerated, and to move them towards a degree. So those are the programs that were referenced. We also have now, will be its 3rd year, a program called Museum Term, whereby students can, it's usually about three to six students, go to New York City. I said to somebody, I wanted to call it Cultural Institution Term, but it doesn't really roll off the tongue, so it's Museum Term for now. But it's not just for art and art history students. The idea behind it is that students really understand how institutions work, particularly institutions that make taste, that make culture, right? That these things are not objective, they are deeply subjective, and they are in many cases driven as much by the institution and institutional norms as they are by even a purely subjective idea of what is, for example, in this case, good art, right, or quality. And who gets access, and so on and so forth, really understanding the matrix that makes culture. I say that with a small m, not the capital M matrix with the trench coats. And so this program, the students go and they are embedded in this case, museums in New York City, working for their fieldwork term. And then they work over the course of the entire spring term at a slightly reduced level with those museums, and they take courses in New York City taught by Bennington faculty members. And we may see more of those kinds of things over time. I'm not making any promises about anything specific, but thinking about Bennington in many ways, and the fieldwork term already does this for us in some respect, as the hub of the education. Right? The place is incredibly important. Right, as those of you who have students who have been here for a few years know, or have had a few students who've been here for many years know, that the place is incredibly important in making so much possible. But the fieldwork term also gives a kind of, I always think about it almost like a respiration, right, as a way of breathing. Right? You can reach out and, as I said, field test your ideas and then come back to this place and rework them and do it again and do it again and do it again. And thinking about the ways in which we can expand and amplify that experience for students is always on our minds. Other questions? Yeah.
What's your position on study abroad programs? Do you think that's replaced by fieldwork terms, or do you think that's still an important part of it?
Depends on the student. I think for some students, particularly, for example, if they're really focused on a language, there's not a lot that can beat an immersive experience in a language. So I think it depends. It depends for each student. We don't have a sort of everyone should or shouldn't. We do find often, to be quite frank, that students who go on a study abroad, when they come back, they do really well, partly because they appreciate in a different way all the resources that are available to them here, in the same way that transfer students often see that in a different light. But every student is different, and some students, for example, go abroad all their fieldwork terms and they feel they really don't need study abroad. And some students, for whatever constellation of reasons, don't go abroad on fieldwork terms, and study abroad is their way to have that experience. In my yes, or both, right? In my personal experience, for example, I did not do study abroad as an undergraduate, but I went to graduate school overseas. So I think there are lots of different ways to work it into your education. And we have students here also who say, I can't imagine doing study abroad because there are so many things I want to take and so many things that I want to do here, and I want to be with these people, and I'll figure it out later, and I'll go work overseas, I'll do something else. Right? And it used to be, frankly, when lots of us were in college and before that study abroad was the way to get abroad. Right? Study abroad, or maybe you got a Fulbright later, which many of our students go on to do. But now there are lots of different ways to get abroad and to travel and to experience different cultures. So it's very much individualized. So it's more of a philosophy than a policy. Yeah.
What are your strategic priorities from leadership standpoint?
Sorry?
Your strategic priorities for the college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, strategic priorities for the college. Okay, got it. Well, so as a college president, interesting, I had a current student who's been involved in the planning and the participation of the events over the weekend come up to me yesterday. He said, God, I didn't realize how much you have to do. because the students see one slice, really. But I will rattle off a couple of things, right? Starting from the students and going out from there, in a sense. Right? And the student experience, as I mentioned yesterday at the alumni gathering, with some significant support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which we're very pleased to have, we are constantly thinking about advising, about the layers of advising that we have. Do we have them right for this particular moment in time? And always thinking about the content of the curriculum and thinking about the ways in which faculty are guiding the educational experiences of students. And it was very gratifying. I was at the Mellon Foundation over the summer, visiting with some people there, and the person who oversees our grant said, you guys are doing exactly what we wish everybody else would do. But you guys are the only people with the courage, the appetite to do it. And we hope that you'll be an example for other institutions. Right, so there's what we do for ourselves, but one of my strategic priorities also is to make sure that that is projected out, right? That both sort of, as they say, for the good of the order, right, it's for the good of the sector, people see what we're doing and continue to come visit us to understand how we do what we do and why we do it that way. And so that we are helping to advance higher education more broadly through the work that we do with our own students. The same is true in the space of diversity and inclusion. I know some of you went to that session yesterday. We have been doing a lot of work in this area. It was one of my strategic priorities before they even hired me. When I was being interviewed, I said, you know, if I come in, this is one of the big things. This is one of the big things that I'm going to be focused on and doing. We hired 7 new faculty last year, really revamped the process to ensure that diversity and inclusion is on the front burner. Fly, sorry, fly. So that's another one of the strategic priorities. But again, also, ideally as a model. Right? We do it for ourselves, but we do it for something bigger than ourselves as well. That's true too on the admissions front. We are building a number of partnerships on the admissions front to ensure that we are providing broad access. Right? And tied to that too, you know, I wouldn't be a college president if I weren't also doing fundraising as a strategic priority. Right? And tied to that access is absolutely fundraising. We spend 1/3 of our budget every year on financial aid to ensure that the students who make the experience everything that it is, right, that they are able to come here, right, and they're able to be here to collaborate and cooperate and support one another, to be peers and colleagues in classes, and to really make this place the vibrant, extraordinary place that it is. So certainly focused on that, and ideally too, I'd like to build up significant endowment for financial aid. So that's a big focus. Obviously, also in the fundraising department, as I mentioned before, is continuing to raise money for Commons to make sure that the campus looks and feels ever better, and that we provide both the spaces and also the equipment and capabilities for students to have the broadest possible range of experiences and to experience them deeply and together. So I can go on and on about that, but one of the ways we talk about it internally, it's very much for a higher ed audience, but just to give you a sense, is fulfilling the promise of progressive education. That's the stuff that I talked about at the beginning. Ensuring financial sustainability and access, and building the Bennington network. Right? And I talked yesterday with the alums about how students enter Bennington not just to a community of 700 students, though those 700 students are extraordinary, but also into a community of 10,000. Right? Because Bennington people are everywhere doing interesting things, and we want to make sure that they're all connected. So continuing to connect alumni and parents to the Bennington community and the Bennington experience, not just for their own children and through their own particular lens, but really to the community as a whole, is absolutely a top priority as well. Yeah, one more. Hi.
My son is a sophomore here, and it's been an absolutely wonderful experience and expect it to continue to be so. He's a little bit of an oddball here at Bennington because just around the time he started his freshman year, he got really interested in computer science. So being a computer science major or computer science emphasis person at Bennington is a little bit odd, especially since the one fully computer science professor has been on sabbatical ever since he arrived. So I was wondering if you had something to
Yes,
say
yes, absolutely.
for him, and also for the idea of, an idea I heard from some of the presentations I was at this weekend is that the alums, some of the alums were saying that the most valuable thing that they got here was along the lines of the plan process, the procedures, the connections, the visioning, as opposed to content. And I feel like my son is now really interested in an area where the content, you just have to learn your basics. But the other is so wonderful, and I don't want to lose that.
So I'll say a couple of things. One is, I don't know if you asked this of the alums, but I think if you actually put it that way to them, they would also say that the content was extraordinarily valuable. It's just that the process is what makes us part of what makes us so distinctive. So it's the thing that they tend to talk about and focus on, because if you're out in the world, not talking to a Bennington crowd, that's the thing that elevates the conversation and makes it distinctive and different. So I would say whether it's our Pulitzer Prize winning alums, our alums working in entrepreneurship, and by the way in computer programming and computer science, they would absolutely say that the content was an essential part of what they learned here. They might just not highlight that in the same way because the process is what makes it distinctive. But I think if you ask them directly, that's what they would say. That's certainly what I have heard. In terms of computer science in particular, we actually have a search going for a computer science faculty member right now. We have someone in who, as you know, is a sabbatical replacement so computer science is being taught and game design is being taught. But we are also searching for another computer science faculty member, and we hope by this time next year to have at least 2. So, because we have, despite your characterization of your son as an oddball, I would say we have an extraordinary number of students who want to study computer science, even if it's not their primary focus. Like my example of a music student who, if you want to, run the soundboard of the future, you sure as hell better study computer science. So we absolutely see that across the board. Same goes for students in the visual arts and so on and so forth, because they want to be able to build the next instrument, the next tool, the next creative machine, right? Not just receive it, because it may not do what they want it to do unless they design it themselves.
So students will be part of that faculty selection?
Yes, they will.
Because my son is interested in that.
They will. That's part of the revamp that we did. I mentioned last year with the hiring of 7 new faculty. We really brought students into the process more, and it was extraordinarily valuable. And so we will. That is now the way we do it, and that will be reflected in the searches this year as well. So, yeah. One more question, if there's one. If not, thank you. I know you want to see your kids, not me. Enjoy. It was nice to meet you.